to the Bare Naked Shrinks.
Hello, hello, and welcome to the Bare Naked Shrinks with me, Dr. Courtney, and my fabulous co-host, Dr. Danny.
Hey.
Today, we have Dr. Janet Lydecker with us, and she is going to discuss weight stigma and bullying. Dr. Lydecker is a clinical psychologist specializing in treatments for teens with eating disorders and higher weight, and has been appointed a fellow of the Academy of Eating Disorders for this work. She directs the Teen Power program in the Yale Department of Psychiatry, which currently has treatment studies for teens with bulimia and higher weight and teens who binge eat. Her published work has focused on weight stigma, body image, disordered eating behaviors, and parent-child interactions around eating and weight. But to start things off, let's get into our
cake and crap.
My cake this week was last Saturday night. There's this thing called Babe Fest in Seattle. So I went with two of my good friends, got together with them before, and then we went together and then ran into a bunch of like my kickball friends there. And it was so fun. And we stayed out way too late and danced a lot. And yeah, just had a really great time. So that was definitely my cake. And I would say my crap, this week I came down with a cold, so that has not been fun. So I'm like still a little congested. So what about you, Danny?
So Janet, I am postmenopausal and I started hormone replacement therapy and had an allergic reaction to the estrogen cream. And so then I tried the oral route, hoping that it was like an ingredient in the cream, and had a horrible reaction. And I literally had to call 911 and the paramedics had to come to my work because my throat was closing. They didn't have to give me an EpiPen, like checked my vitals and they were like, you're fine, but like, don't ever take that again. But I'm so confused because like I took estradiol, like birth control for, 30 years or something. And so I don't know why I would be allergic. So anyway, so I'm seeing a doctor about that because I really want to be on HRT. And then the other thing, my biopsy, I had a skin biopsy and I have freaking skin cancer. But this is my third time. It's basal cell. It's not that big of a deal, but it's just so annoying. So kids, stay out of the sun. Don't go to tanning beds. Get a spray tan.
Were you big into tanning beds, Danielle?
Yes, this was the 90s. Everyone went to tanning beds. Like my mom signed a permission form for me to do it under the age of 18. Like, and I got mad at her this week. I was like, Mom, I can't believe you did that. Like, that's so irresponsible. And she was like, oh, really? Do you remember 16-year-old you? Do you think I can say no? I was like, true. I probably like harassed you. So that would be the crap and cake. Well, this hasn't happened yet, but this is about to happen. So I'm at home right now in our like guest room / office because right after this, I'm going to my son's school. They have this like special event. It's kind of like for community building. Maybe it's a fundraiser. I'm not really sure, called Masked Singer. And it's based on the TV show. So I'm dressing up in a unicorn inflatable and I'm going to sing Good For You by Olivia Rodrigo. And then this is the best. If I make it to the final, if I make it to the showdown, I'm going to sing Pink Pony Club by Chappell Roan in my unicorn and like do the pony. I did Olivia Rodrigo for the first round, even though I like singing Chappell Roan more because I feel like the elementary kids are going to be more into that. And then I'm just going to like really like be like, good for you. You look happy and healthy. And like just really rage and hope they love it.
Is that why Lively likes Pink Pony Club?
Yes, because I've been singing it.
I got a really cute clip of Lively this week singing Pink Pony Club. It was adorable.
She's 3 and she loves to sing. She loves Taylor Swift, but now she's discovered Chappell Roan and I'm all for it. Janet, how about you?
My cake has to be the weather. We've had a gorgeous fall and this week has been just perfect with the leaves mostly on the trees, although they're starting to fall all at once and create a lot of work. But it's been perfect temperatures, and this is my favorite time in New England. So it's been just a wonderful time to walk to work, to walk around town, to be outside.
I miss seasons, and I've never been to the East Coast in the fall.
I will say I have really appreciated the seasons moving back to Seattle. That was something that I missed in San Diego.
So there's a downside to the seasons, though, and this is definitely my crap of the week. So I have a almost 5-year-old puppy, and she has allergies. And so this week she has been chomping down on her little paws because it's the season for allergies. It's better than the spring when her ears are bothering her. And
What kind of dog?
She's mostly poodle, but some Cavalier King, so she has really long ears. but they're very sensitive to all sorts of allergies. She was actually supposed to be a therapy dog. I'm still working on the training though.
Oh my gosh, I forgot that my other crap for this week would be the weather here. We had a bomb cyclone this week.
I was going to ask you what the H is a bomb cyclone because I saw it on the news.
Yeah, it was just like a lot of wind and rain. And actually, like, I'm in the city of Seattle, and the city of Seattle itself, we didn't really get hit very much. Like, my lights just flickered, but like everywhere outside of the city, like, people are still without power. Like, there's
Whoa.
clips that I've seen of just like trees on tops of cars. 2 people died.
Gosh.
It was pretty bad. I wasn't really affected, but it was kind of scary on Wednesday night. Okay, so I think for today we were going to talk about funny memories from Thanksgivings of our past, and I'll go first. So I am unclear how this started, how this became a tradition in my family. For some reason, there's a tradition in my family on Thanksgiving after dinner, after things are cleaned up, for Earl's Gotta Die by the Chicks to be blasted very loudly throughout the house. And my brother and my sister's husband take off their shirts and swing it around their heads. And the whole family is just like blasting Earl's Gotta Die and like running around in circles in my dad's kitchen.
Oh, that's funny.
It is. There's some really funny videos from it. Unclear how it happened, unclear why it still continues, but here we are.
That's cute. I like it. I think this was Thanksgiving. It could have been Christmas. I was probably in high school and we were at my aunt's house and there were like candles and somehow, it must have been Christmas, but I'll just tell the story because I can't think of Thanksgiving one. And there was tissue paper and the tissue paper caught fire and like nobody noticed. And I was like, I couldn't get the words out. And all of a sudden I yelled out, tragedy. And like everyone stopped what they were doing and looked and they were like dying laughing. I mean, we got the fire out and they were like, where did the word tragedy come from? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'm like reading Shakespeare right now or something. But it was so funny. And to this day, like anytime something bad happens at like a family holiday, everyone yells out tragedy.
Those are both fantastic. I don't know how I can follow those. So our family Thanksgivings are pretty traditional New England. So it's very cozy, usually a lot of people around the table, all the traditional foods. But my family members are very funny. And so there was one year when we just decided we would do family trivia. So everyone came up with things about each other that were mostly funny. And we went around and we were entertained by it for way longer than I thought we would be. I think it also had some history in it. It was really long. It's a long game.
That's impressive.
But it's one of my best memories because we were all not just having little conversations throughout the table, but we were all participating and remembering things that happened to folks in the family.
That's cute. I like that.
Really cute. I might
that. Steal that.
Maybe not a funny memory so much as endearing.
Okay, well, why don't we get into our educational portion of the day?
Mean Girls.
So, Janet, why don't you tell us about your research on bullying and weight stigma?
Absolutely. So I think a little preamble before I tell you about the treatment study that I did. So I treat eating disorders in kids with higher weight and adults, but my focus recently has been adolescents. So that means we work with kids who have their eating disorder as the primary concern, but have usually been told by various others to lose weight and that it might be affecting their health. And so they have usually 2 goals of weight loss and disordered eating. But when they come to us, we focus more on the eating disorder. When I was doing a binge eating study, a lot of our kiddos would tell us that they had been teased or bullied or just treated poorly because of their weight from many different sources. So peers at school, parents, other family members. And so I wanted to include that in our binge eating treatment. We were going to do a session. It was pretty condensed, but it was on coping with stressful things. So I wanted to acknowledge these peer stressors. And there was nothing out there on how to treat not only weight bullying, but any kind of bullying. And so did the best I could, had some of the material in there, mostly psychoeducation and safety planning. But that was where the idea for this treatment study came from, that we wanted to use what we already have in terms of existing treatments, but tailor it for weight-based bullying. The other reason why I wanted to do that is just because weight-based bullying has so many negative consequences. So when you read about it in the literature, there's depression, there's anxiety, there's eating disorders, there's suicide attempts. It really is a very severe set of mental health outcomes that can come from bullying. So the PTSD struck me as a place where we could intervene. So we used a trauma treatment that is well validated for other kinds of trauma, like sexual abuse and child abuse, things like that, and tailored it for weight bullying by pulling in some of the eating disorder treatment that we would do, CBT for eating disorders, in order to, what I thought was, prevent eating disorders from happening. So this was a small study. It was a proof of concept. We wanted to see if it was even possible to get patients who wanted this treatment, referrals from providers, but also to see if we could get meaningful outcomes. So the only I should back up and say the kids who I was trying to treat, we had a pretty broad range, so middle school and high school, but they had to be living at home. They had to have experienced some kind of bullying and be upset about it. So we kept the criteria pretty broad. Again, trying to see who is it who would want this treatment. We had no eating disorder requirement, no weight-related requirement. They couldn't be in an existing trauma treatment for a different kind of trauma even, and they couldn't be in a higher level of care. But otherwise, they were at least a little bit upset about the bullying that happened, we would take them, again, thinking we were going to be preventing some of these mental health problems from coming. So we ended up screening almost 200 people and evaluating about 50 to get at our sample of 30 kids who had been bullied and were upset about it. That's a pretty standard trajectory. It was probably a little better than some of our other studies in terms of flow. But the surprising thing about the kids who we ended up excluding before we got to our sample was that they had very severe pathology. So some of them were in higher levels of care or needed to be hospitalized for depression or for their eating disorder. And again, our level of when we excluded was really high. We would have taken just about anyone, even if they were already in treatment for something else. So excluding a bunch of kids for that reason was surprising to me. And then the other surprising thing was that we had a lot of kids reach out on their own, and these are teenagers, but they are under 18, and so for a research study, they can't consent to therapy to be in a study for themselves. And we did have to exclude not too small of a number because their parents were either unwilling to support them being in therapy or unavailable even to sign the consent. We did have some family therapy sessions as part of this, but that was not a reason we excluded. As long as they could show up and sign the consent, that was our standard, and we still had to exclude some teens because their parents weren't able to. So that was surprising and really upsetting. One of the other interesting things about our participants, again, we only had 30 because this was the proof of concept, was that they were really diverse. We were nationwide because it was telehealth. We had a good sample who was not white. We had some gender and gender identity diversity, sexuality diversity, and what we found was that they experienced discrimination for several reasons, not just because of their weight. And so one of our working hypotheses that we're now thinking about is maybe seeking treatment required more than just one part of their identity being attacked or marginalized. So while we were saying weight, we got a good portion of our participants who would say, well, yeah, I was teased for my weight and I was teased for race or because of my home life in some other way. So in terms of what we did, the trauma treatment that we used is called TFCBT, Trauma-Focused Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And that is an exposure-based therapy that's just for kids. So with adults, there is a focus on telling the story of the trauma either out loud and re-listening to it or working through it in some other systematic way. And for kids, there's more support at the beginning, more rationale being developed in order to get the parent and the child on board with doing the painful work of reliving that trauma by telling a story. And then what I think is the most useful part of this therapy and the most enjoyable part for me as a therapist is the exposure is developing a trauma narrative. So you create a story with the child. It can be a written narrative, it can be a PowerPoint presentation, a graphic novel, any kind of format, but it's something concrete. And so we took that part of TFCBT, we took all of TFCBT and added an eating disorder focus, but we took the trauma narrative and made that into a bullying narrative. So the biggest difference is that bullying by definition happens more than once. So it has to be a repeated experience. And so we've started with a timeline where the teens would tell us broad strokes, all of the teasing, all of the relational bullying, all of the physical bullying that they experienced. And then we would pick the first time they were bullied, the worst time they were bullied, and the most recent time they were bullied, because we wanted to get into some depth. And then with the original TFCBT as well as with ours, the processing of the trauma happens by elaborating details in that narrative. So we make a messy copy where we do carrots and we add in thoughts and emotions that were happening. We cross out maladaptive thoughts or distorted thoughts and we reframe them in positive ways. We add in coping plans, make a messy version, and then the teen is able to take that and have that be their story, but also make a polished version that they then share with their parent to get some of that mutual understanding and support. So, broad strokes, that was what our therapy was, and the findings were encouraging. So we were looking for proof of concept, and we got it. We got very high ratings on how satisfied they were with individual sessions and how helpful the materials were. We also had about 3/4 who made it through the entire study, which is always a good thing to see. So they did, I think it was 75% did all of the sessions, and the average sessions was about 9 out of the 12. It was a 3-month treatment study. So then, in terms of our findings, we were looking to see, there was no control group, so we weren't looking to see better outcomes than a different treatment, but we were looking to see if we could get clinically meaningful outcomes from the treatment. So the first one we looked at was PTSD, and even though we had such a low bar for how distressed or upset the teens were from the bullying when they started, we actually had 71% who met PTSD criteria at baseline, which was way higher than I was expecting, especially because about 1/3 of kids who are bullied end up going on to develop PTSD. So that seemed to be part of what brought them to seek treatment. And amongst those who did have PTSD at the beginning, a little bit less than half no longer met criteria for PTSD at the end, which is encouraging. Always want to see more, but again, that was encouraging. We saw most of the changes in the cognitive symptoms, so in some of those intrusive thoughts that can come along with PTSD rather than physiological arousal or the avoidance behaviors. Those didn't seem to change as much as the thoughts. And then for weight and shape concerns, which was my primary interest given where this study started, we looked at overvaluation of weight and shape. So that core eating disorder pathology of weight and shape being a central part of how people evaluate themselves or see themselves as a person. And so having no eating disorder criteria for the study, we had about half who had clinical levels of overvaluation at the start and a little under half who no longer had clinically significant overvaluation at the end of treatment. So again, wish it could have been better, but that is on par with other eating disorder treatments and with PTSD treatments. So what we did not find that I was hoping we would find was some of the post-traumatic growth that we see in PTSD treatments. So I was conceptualizing post-traumatic growth as a reduction in internalized weight bias, so how people put some of society's biases about weight onto themselves, as well as increases in either self-esteem, self-compassion, or both. And we did not see any of those changes as significant over the course of our treatment. And we also felt pretty rushed with the narrative and towards the end of the narrative. So it was 12 weeks, which feels like a lot of time and certainly seemed like it when we were starting treatment. But by the end of treatment, it was really tough to get all of the processing in without skipping over important parts. So I think as I move forward with this, one of my top goals is to give more time, hoping that will help with some of this traumatic growth.
Like 16 sessions or something?
Yes, hopefully not longer, but I think 4 months instead of 3 would be a little bit easier to get some of that reflection time in.
What did the narratives look like? Like, were they like telling stories, like making it more fantastical, or was it like the exact version of what happened?
It was the exact version. So because these are teens, we did try to have this be life story style. Nearly everyone did it in PowerPoint, so there were images as well as a lot of focus on fonts and colors and what goes on each slide, which I thought was great. And it was definitely easy to do on Zoom because all of this was telehealth. We could share screen. We learned how to let them take control of our screen and vice versa. Yeah, but it was factual, and that let us get into, well, what were you actually thinking? What were you feeling? Let's try to imagine back in this time what it was.
Cool. And last question, sorry, I'll let Courtney ask questions too. Do you have any takeaway, like for us as clinicians or for parents or for teens, I guess, if they are experiencing weight-related bullying, is there something immediate they can do that would be helpful?
Yes and no. I have more advice about what not to do. For clinicians and for me, honestly, my takeaway is this was an eating disorder treatment. It was not preventing future eating disorders from happening. It really was reducing current pathology because that's who was seeking treatment. I think one of the first don'ts would be don't wait. So don't assume that it's a normal part of childhood and something that will just resolve on its own. That certainly could be true, but when we look at some of these consequences of weight-based and other forms of bullying, they're pretty serious, and that is a big risk to take. We did get meaningful outcomes with our participants. It's possible we would have gotten more change if the treatment had been earlier, closer to when the bullying was happening. One of the changes we did have to make for our treatment compared to the original TFCBT was around safety planning. So we moved safety planning up to the top. In traditional TFCBT, it's assumed that the child is no longer in a dangerous situation, natural disaster, at home with an abuser, nothing like that. But bullying, especially when we define it broadly, can be hard to avoid. And going to the lengths that would be needed to avoid any kind of weight stigma or discrimination might actually be counterproductive, because it would be some safety and avoidance behaviors that would then maybe make the memories of bullying stronger and more intrusive. So we did make sure there was physical safety. We talked to the child and the parent about the support that would be helpful, what the school policies were if it was happening at school, and had that be a conversation throughout the entire treatment rather than saving it for the end. We had a couple of participants who switched school districts or just cut the person who was bullying them out of their life. And that was an amazing difference for those children. That's not always possible. And there are consequences to removing yourself from the rest of your life just to cut out the bully. But that, as extreme as it was life-changing.
This is fascinating. And I'm actually kind of surprised this is the first time anyone has studied something like this in eating disorders.
Me too.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating because I just think about like the individuals that I work with, and so many of them at some point have been told by a pediatrician or a family member that they need to lose weight or, don't eat sugar or cut down on the carbs or whatever it is, and have that as such like a core memory that they still remember years later on. And not that that's like always how people eating disorders develop at all. And it is something that's so common. So it's quite fascinating that this is so new. And I'm also just like really thankful that you're doing this work, because I think that it is really needed. And as someone who also does trauma therapy, I haven't done TFCBT, but PE and CPT, and just thinking about doing it on something more specific related to eating is also just like not something that I'd thought about before, but that weight stigma or that bullying aspect, like how that could be really helpful for some folks that really cling on to their history of bullying or teasing or being shamed for their body size as the reason that they don't want to pursue full recovery, which is again something that I see in like a handful of folks that I'm like currently working with. So,
and it's hard because I think in order to be, and we're talking small t trauma, so not necessarily what's going to be the main criteria for PTSD, but it really needs to be something experienced rather than perceived. So we stuck with verbal, so teasing or comments, discrimination, being excluded. We had just a little bit of physical bullying, some cyberbullying. The problem is also with the weight stigma in our society, which I would say this is not a treatment for, because that's just so amorphous that how would you even create a timeline of, well, when were you aware of weight stigma? But it's so pervasive that it would be hard to do. And yet that's where the post-traumatic growth, I was hoping to get some of that advocacy would have been around.
I wonder, like, because I'm thinking about DBT, right, as a DBT clinician, and we think about the biosocial model, and like, we have the biology portion of it, and then the social component, we talk about like invalidation, right? And then Melanie Harned's work on DBT-PE, and specifically some of the new things that she's created specifically around traumatic invalidation, right? And when we think about the invalidating environment for folks with eating disorders, we do often talk about like the sociocultural attitudes towards body shape and size. And so I wonder if like some of that traumatic invalidation work could be put towards some of that invalidating environment in terms of eating disorders.
Yes. And I remember hearing a talk, I think a couple of years ago now, on traumatic invalidation and thinking, this is exactly it. And then not knowing how to move forward with that. It can be so demoralizing to switch your perspective on what's healthy, what's good for you, what promotes your well-being, and then have everyone tell you that you're wrong.
Now I feel like I'm going farther beyond the topic, but I guess I'm just thinking about like anyone and eating disorder recovery too. Like I feel like one of the hardest, something that's challenging is the fact that like people are recovering into a society that is fat phobic and full of weight stigma, and so many attitudes around like what we should and shouldn't eat and, you know, judgments around food and stuff like that. That just makes it, I think, recovery really challenging. This is again, more of a tangent, but like yesterday, one of my team members, one of her patients that she's been treating for an eating disorder for, I think, over 2 years now, had a pediatrician visit yesterday. She sent me a photo of something that her pediatrician gave her that had all about healthy food recommendations. Limit eating out at fast food restaurants, limit fried food, limit soda and sugary drinks. And it's like, this girl has been in treatment for an eating disorder for 2 years. Like, she doesn't need this information as well.
Yes, pediatric obesity treatment is terrible. And I say this all the time. It's the biggest regret of my life was working in a pediatric obesity clinic. And just, I apologize to anyone who I inflicted harm on, because it's literally like, I think about it every day and can't believe that I did that, and trying to make it right now. I mean, I know we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, you know, when I was doing that 10 years ago, I didn't know the harm. So we need to prevent that further harm, though, and get the information out that any kind of early intervention at a kid's body habitus is damaging. Period. Full stop.
It's so hard with some of with our current teens and young adults living in a society that very clearly prefers a thinner frame. Because I have a bulimia study right now, and we see such a desperation for any kind of weight loss that when there are no guardrails, it's also so damaging. The extremes that people go to lose weight, to change their appearance, to feel better about themselves, completely tied to their weight, that's also scary. And it feels like there has to be some kind of balance, and I don't know. I'm working on it. I don't know how to strike that balance. So in some ways it's easier to say, I'm going to just treat the eating disorder. They're still going back into society.
Getting all these messages that something about their appearance is flawed. Well, on that happy note,
Interview the expert.
So Janet, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
I grew up outside of Boston. So I was in a suburb of Boston that was a commuter city. So my dad worked in the city and my mom worked in town, standard New England suburb. And my childhood growing up was very family centered. We did a lot with our extended family and our nuclear family. I have one brother, and did various clubs in school. I didn't do sports after getting to high school because I was done with that. Did a lot of academics, so that ended up being my focus.
That tracks. What got you into psychology?
So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I started in college. I was thinking, well, maybe I want to write or be an editor and help people with the publishing process. Maybe I want to be an interpreter and speak a bunch of languages. It was as I was just navigating a new social situation and feeling like I wanted to keep notes on what people were telling me so that I could keep everyone's story straight, that I went, oh, maybe I do want to listen to people and talk to them for a living. And I think that has persisted with some of the treatment, although now it's not peers, it's younger. And I still very much enjoy the writing part of it as a nice balance to the in-person. So helping someone right in front of me, but also helping more broadly so it doesn't feel like everything's tied to that one relationship.
If you could have one superpower related to psychology or your work, what would it be?
Well, I had a postdoc she was here for 3 years, who loved that question. And so we asked it at every single event that we did. So I have so many answers for this question.
Okay.
And I can tell you everyone else's answers too, but I won't. So I would like to this is a very psychology answer, but I would like to be able to hear what people were thinking. I would like to be able to turn it off, though, because I don't always want to hear it. But that was my answer for years. And it might have been because we had some. It's always hard to communicate. I think that would be my superpower.
What are some common misconceptions about therapy or psychology that you wish people understood?
Well, I think one of the misperceptions that I deal with a lot is the idea that therapy is self-indulgent, where people are just there to vent and to talk. And so I try, in my work, it's very much a medical model. So it's people who are coming for a particular concern that is distressing them and that they want to work on. And so it always makes me upset when people say, oh yeah, I need to work on myself. I'm going to go to therapy, because it feels like it undermines some of the pain that people are experiencing when they start therapy. And similarly, the idea of therapy going on forever, I think, is a misconception. So one of the benefits of having a treatment study is that we say set number of sessions. We have very little flexibility, a little bit, but not a ton. I have a tiny private practice. So I find that when I present a brief model, which is like 4 to 6 months, people are really surprised and usually happy with the idea that they don't have to indefinitely be in therapy.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
What is at the top of your bucket list?
So I've been working on my bucket list. I told you about my therapy dog. Probably getting her trained is at the top of it. I also just took an amazing trip to Portugal and Spain. That was an adventure. So I think I'm kind of stuck on the idea of travel right now. And I would love to go to, I think Greece is at the top of my list right now. I don't really know why, other than it just feels so different from anywhere I've been.
Cool. Well, thanks for letting us get to know you a little bit more, Janet. Okay, so what is our homework? You better work.
Work it, y'all.
Well, so the call to action that I always give around weight bullying is don't wait. So don't consider it a normal part of childhood. And seek treatment, even though this treatment itself isn't something that's ready as a package for people to take out. All of the mental health conditions that are associated with bullying have known treatments. And so it is very possible to get help and worth seeking treatment. The other thing I would say in a related way is just watch what you say to other people. You never know what people are working on. And so if you try to think through, well, could this be considered to be a criticism, then I think that would help. It's even easier if you just try to never talk about someone else's body. But if you can't for some reason, thinking through how it might be interpreted by someone who's struggling.
There are way more things that we can comment on or compliment people on outside of our appearance.
So many. Just need to practice, I think.
Yeah, totally. Well, Janet, it's been so wonderful having you here today. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about what you're working on these days. So please make sure to go to barenakedshrinks.com to download your weekly homework, and stay tuned for our next episode with Dr. Tiffany Brown on the Body Project called Scars to Your Beautiful. We'll see you then. Bye.
See y'all next time.